A Shopify mutation can fail in 3 completely different ways and 2 of them still return HTTP 200 OK. If you only check the status code, you will ship broken writes to production and never see them fail. Today we cover Admin API mutations, how to write data safely, and the error handling patterns that actually work straight from Shopify's own GraphQL reference and the real source of the official Shopify app.js library. Welcome back to Shopify Development Deep Dive. Part 15 covered reading data with queries. Today we write it with mutations, and we spend most of the episode on the part almost every tutorial skips: what happens when a mutation goes wrong. Everything you see is quoted verbatim from Shopify's current mutation reference, the real UserError object definition, and the real error handling code shipped in the official Shopify app.js client library. Here's the plan. First, the productCreate mutation itself, its structure, the real curl call from Shopify's docs, and what a real success response looks like. Second, the UserError object, the field and message every mutation payload can carry, and how to request it. Third, why HTTP 200 is not success on this API, and the 3 layers where a mutation can actually fail. Fourth, GraphqlQueryError, the real exception class the official node client throws, and the real try-catch pattern for handling it. And fifth, retries and timeouts, the real client options a production integration actually needs. Here's the whole failure surface on one slide. Layer 1 is the transport itself, a real network failure, or an auth problem the platform rejects before your query even runs. Layer 2 is the top-level errors, array malformed queries, throttling, access denial, and Shopify still answers with HTTP 200. Layer 3 is what the official Shopify app.js client does with that. When the response body carries an errors array, its request method throws a real exception, GraphqlQueryError, so you don't have to remember to check for it by hand. And layer 4 is the one that trips up the most apps, payload.userErrors, the mutation-specific validation failures, also HTTP 200, no exception thrown, and the object you asked for can simply come back null. A production integration has to check both the thrown exception and the UserErrors array, every single time. What you need to follow along: a development store with write access, or a custom app with an admin API access token that has the right product scope. That's what productCreate needs. For the client library examples, a node app using its Shopify/Shopify API directly, or Shopify app remix, which wraps it. And it helps to have watched part 15 first. We build directly on the query root, fields, and arguments covered there, just pointed at a mutation instead of a query. This is the reference's own real curl example for productCreate, shortened for the frame. The full call also passes product options for color and size. Same transport as every query from part 15, post, the version in the path, the access token in a header. What's different is inside the query key. This document starts with the keyword mutation instead of query, and its selection set asks for 2 very different things back: the product object you just created, and a field called UserErrors. That second field is the one this whole episode is about. Here's that same real mutation laid out cleanly. productCreate takes a product input object, here just a title, and its selection set has 2 siblings under one set of curly braces, product and UserErrors. This is the pattern every single admin API mutation follows. Without exception, every mutation payload type in the schema carries its own UserErrors list alongside whatever data it returns. If you write a mutation and don't select UserErrors, you can still get a completely valid HTTP 200 response back while silently missing a validation failure. Selecting it is not optional in practice, even though the schema doesn't force you to. And this is the real shape of a success taken from the reference's own worked example. Data, then the mutation's name as a key, then your 2 selected fields, product, populated with a real GID in the title you sent, and UserErrors, an empty array. That empty array is the tell. A mutation succeeded not when product came back non-null. Some mutations legitimately return null data even on success, but when UserErrors is empty. Check the array's length before you trust anything else in the payload. This is the real UserError object from Shopify's schema, and it's deliberately small, just 2 fields. Field is a list of strings, because the path to the bad input can be nested: product, then variance, then index 2, then price, for example, and it's nullable, because some validation failures aren't tied to one specific field at all. Message is non-null, plain text meant for a developer, not a customer. Shopify's own docs describe UserError as covering, quote, invalid field values or business logic violations that prevent the operation from completing. When UserErrors comes back non-empty, that's this shape, 1 entry per problem, and your job is to read field to know what to fix and message to know why. This is the reference's own real React Router example, React Router being the framework Shopify app remix now builds embedded apps on. Authenticate.admin gives you back an admin client already carrying the shop's access token, so admin.graphql just takes the mutation string, no manual headers, no manual endpoint construction. That #GraphqL comment right after the backtick isn't decoration. Tooling in this ecosystem uses it to apply GraphQL syntax highlighting and validation to the embedded template string. The rest is the identical mutation and UserErrors selection you just saw over raw curl, same contract, friendlier plumbing. This is real, verbatim code from the Shopify app.js repository's own client documentation. When you use the lower-level shopify.clients.graphql client directly, its request method does the layer 2 check for you if the response body carries a top-level errors array. Request throws GraphqlQueryError instead of quietly handing you a malformed body. Catch it, confirm the instance with InstanceIf, and the docs show you exactly what's on it. Error.bodyOptional.errors.GraphQL errors for the actual GraphQL error list, and error.headers for the response headers Shopify sent back. This is layer 2 from our diagram: throttling, malformed queries, access denial. It says nothing about user errors. That's still a separate check on the payload you get back on success. 2 more real options straight from the client's documented parameter list. Retries is a number the docs say must be between 0 and 3. It's built into the request method itself, so transient failures like a throttled response can be retried without you writing your own backoff loop. Signal takes a standard AbortSignal, and the doc's own example wires it to AbortSignal.timeout of 3000 milliseconds if Shopify hasn't answered in 3 seconds. The call aborts and throws an abort error instead of hanging your request handler. And the response itself, on success, gives you 3 things back: data, extensions, that's the same cost object from part 15, and headers. This last snippet combines the 2 real patterns you just saw into the shape. A production mutation call actually needs the try-catch from the Shopify app.js docs wrapping the UserErrors check from the productCreate reference. The catch block only ever fires for layer 2 and 3 a genuinely thrown GraphqlQueryError, meaning the request itself failed. But a request can succeed completely, land in that try block, return HTTP 200 with a clean body, and still carry a non-empty UserErrors array. Layer 4, business logic, no exception at all. Skip either check and you will ship a mutation that fails silently in one of these 2 ways, and in production, that usually means a merchant thinks their product was created when it wasn't. The recurring mistakes, gathered in one place. Always select UserErrors on every mutation you write. The schema will happily let you omit it, and that's exactly how validation failures go unnoticed. A response that parses cleanly and returns HTTP 200 does not mean the mutation succeeded. Check UserErrors.length before you trust anything else in the payload. Remember, GraphqlQueryError and UserErrors are different layers entirely. Catch the thrown exception for transport and query level failures, and separately check the array for business logic failures. You need both, not one or the other. Set an explicit retries count and an AbortSignal timeout on any mutation your app depends on in production, so a slow response degrades gracefully instead of hanging a request handler. And when you do log an error, log error.bodyOptional.errors.GraphQL errors, not just the top-level message. That's where the actual GraphQL error detail lives. Pulling it together. Every mutation payload type in the Admin API schema carries its own UserErrors list alongside its data selected every time, with no exceptions. UserError itself is deliberately small: field, the path to the bad input, and message, the human-readable reason. HTTP 200 on this API covers 3 completely different outcomes: a clean success, a top-level errors array, or a payload with populated UserErrors, and only inspecting the body tells them apart. The official Shopify app.js client throws a real GraphqlQueryError for that top-level errors case, catchable with InstanceIf, carrying the detail on error.body. And for resilience, the same client gives you a documented retries option, 0 through 3, plus a standard AbortSignal for timeouts. Put the exception catch and the UserErrors check together, and you have a mutation call that actually tells you the truth about what happened. That's mutations done right. The UserErrors contract every payload carries, the 3 layers a call can actually fail on, and the real GraphqlQueryError and retry patterns from Shopify's own client library. Part 17 takes the next step, the bulk operations API, for when a single mutation or query isn't enough and you need to read or write data at real scale. If you're building along with this series, subscribe now so you don't miss it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in Part 17.